Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a canvas from start to finish. If my voice sounds a little different, it's just because I had some hot tea. In order to do this, you'll need the following supplies. You'll need stretcher bars. I have 2 at 16 inches and 2 at 20 inches. These make up the stretcher frame, and you need to make sure they're compatible. Sometimes if you use different brands of stretcher bars, the corners won't match up properly. You can see these two different types won't make a nice corner when put together because they have different profiles. You will also need canvas that is about 6 to 10 inches larger than your stretcher bars. So my piece of canvas is 22 by 26 inches. And I'm going to stretch that over a stretch frame that is 16 by 20 inches. You'll need a staple gun with plenty of staples, and you'll need gesso and a gesso brush. It's not a bad idea to have a hammer or a rubber mallet handy, although you may not need it. Building your own canvases is a much cheaper alternative to similar quality store-bought canvases, provided you're building a lot of them, and it's a much higher quality alternative than the inexpensive canvases that you find at hobby stores. Building your own also gives you the freedom to customize the size to your liking. You can build any size you want. Step 1 is simple. You just need to piece the stretcher bars together to make your stretcher frame. Most of the time, these can be put together by hand, but sometimes the fit is so tight that you need a hammer to pound them into place, like so. You can see that each bar has a little lip. As you put them together, you need to make sure that these lips are on the same side. When you're done with that, you need to make sure that all the corners are 90 degrees, so you have a proper rectangle. You can check this simply by measuring from corner to opposite corner, then again on the other two corners. If your angles are 90 degrees, then these two measurements will be the same. If they're not, then you have the wrong type of parallelogram. Mine are off a little bit, so I'll press them into place to square it up. I can also use the hammer if I'm not strong enough, but obviously I'm very powerful, and this is easy for me. Before moving on to step 2, it's always a good idea to double check to make sure your angles are 90 degrees and that the lip is aligned on the same side. Then fix any mistakes. Yep, that looks pretty good. Now it's time to grab your piece of canvas and move on to step 2. Lay your piece of canvas out on a sturdy table or on a mostly clean floor, and place your stretcher frame with the lip down against the canvas. Do not have the lips face up. They need to be face down. This is a common mistake. Don't do it. Center your stretcher frame on the canvas. And now you're done with step 2. Step 3 is when you get to use the staple gun. Go ahead and grab the staple gun. Make sure it has plenty of staples in it. In the middle of the one of the long sides, wrap the canvas around the bar and staple it in. You'll need to use a little pressure and press the staple gun down firmly so it doesn't recoil. If it recoils, your staple will not be in all the way, and it will need to be removed. And you'll need to do it again. Also, make sure you're putting staples on the wide, flat part of the stretcher bar, not the side or the part with the lip. After you've put the first staple in, you want to staple on the opposite side. Turn your canvas around, line it up, then wrap the opposite side around the stretcher bar and pull it tight. This does take a fair amount of effort. You'll pull it tight, hold it, and then staple it. You can see you have this little wrinkle forming. As we stretch, this wrinkle should slowly move toward the corners and eventually go away. After I get these 2 staples in, I like to go ahead and drive a couple staples on both sides. They should be about 3 to 4 inches apart, about the width of your cell phone. Next, you're going to move to the short end of your canvas and do exactly what you did to start out. From the middle of the bar, wrap it around and pull it snug. Hold it in place and drive another staple. Flip your canvas around to the opposite side. Wrap the canvas around, pull it snug, hold it in place, and drive the staple. And again, I like to add a couple staples on either side, about 3 to 4 inches apart. Now, if you flip your canvas over, you can see that you've got loose canvas in the corners, which kind of makes a diamond shape. This is called the diamond method of stretching canvases for this reason. You can see that the wrinkle is moving outward as we pull the canvas tighter from the center outwards. Now back to stapling. You will just continue to staple with 2 staples per side, working out from the center, keeping your staples about 3 or 4 inches apart and bouncing around to opposite sides. As you pull, you will pull toward the middle of the canvas and outward. This allows the canvas to be stretched evenly with the diamond-shaped wrinkles getting consolidated towards the corners. When you have just a few inches left in the corners, we need to stop and do a little handiwork. We end up with an excess of canvas in these corners, and we need to wrap them so they look nice. If you've ever wrapped a present, you can probably work this out. I'll show you 2 methods. First, the easier method. Just wrap one end around and place staples all the way to the edge on one side. Then wrap the remaining canvas over the corner. Pull it toward the middle and outward, and drive your staples to the end of the bar. You will have a little canvas sticking out. We can hide that later. Now I'll show you the slightly more difficult method that looks a lot better. For this, you will also want to place staples all the way to the edge on one side. Then, with the excess canvas, you'll tuck it underneath, like so. Instead of having a little triangle on the edge of your canvas, you'll just have this little seam right on the corner. And again, put in the remaining staples, and the loose canvas can be hidden later. Go ahead and repeat this for the other 3 corners. As you do so, make sure you're getting the corners stretched nice and tight. The corners are the hardest to get right. It just takes a little patience and a little muscle, but you can do it. I will also say that it doesn't have to be perfect, just nearly perfect. When we put the gesso on, it will actually tighten the canvas a little more, and any minor looseness in the corners will go away. Now, if you've done this correctly, you will have a 90-degree corners, and the surface of your canvas that you will paint on will be open. In other words, you oriented the lips on the stretcher bars correctly so that you can push on the edges and the canvas will move. If you had the lips on the back, then when you make your painting, you'll get a little rectangle around the perimeter of your canvas, which is like a message to the world that you don't know how to stretch canvases and therefore are not worthy of the art world. When your canvas is stretched, I recommend taking a break. Brew up a piping hot mug of tea and relax. When you're done relaxing, you can come back for the final step, which is priming the canvas. The primer we use is called gesso, which is a really high-grade primer. It seals the canvas like any primer would, but its strength comes when you start painting. It is designed to soak up just the right amount of paint and also hold on tight, so the paint never flakes off. Before we get started, a word of warning. This stuff is made to do one thing: stick to fabric forever, which means if you get it on your clothes, it will not come off. You can potentially rinse it off with water if you get to it immediately, but once it's dry, it's not going anywhere. So wear an apron or some old clothes or somebody else's clothes. The job here is simple. You're going to cover the outside of the canvas with gesso. I like to start by priming around the edges. You won't be painting on the edges of your canvas, but sometimes paint will get on the edges, and if oil paint gets on canvas, it will rot the canvas, and we don't want that. So to be sure, I prime not only the edges, but I also like to get a little gesso on the back side, just to be sure. After I get all the edges primed with gesso, and just a little sliver on the back side, I start on the face of the canvas, in a corner, and begin filling it in. A small canvas like this doesn't take a lot of time, but you will need to do a minimum of 2 layers of gesso. And honestly, you should probably do 3. Personally, I do a minimum of 5 layers. If gesso is really thick and it creates a rough texture, that's fine, but it might be difficult to paint on. So to fix this, you can just soak the gesso brush with water before you begin. This will let the gesso lay down a little smoother. If you want to be really smooth, you can apply the second layer with a putty knife or a small piece of cardstock, or even sand it with 100 grit sandpaper when it's dry. But you'll want to do that outside or in a well-ventilated area. Sometimes with cheap gesso brushes, the bristles will fall out. You're welcome to try to fish them out of the gesso, but it's not a big deal if you leave them in. I've seen paintings with all kinds of stuff sealed in the gesso. Bristles from gesso brushes, cigarette butts, bits of paper and plastic. Personally, I try to remove everything. Gesso dries pretty quickly. You'll want to wait about an hour and a half to 2 hours before adding your second coat. You can see how much tighter the gesso makes the canvas. It will loosen up a little as it dries, and it will loosen up a little more as you paint on it. When you're done, you can hold it up to the light. If you can see little pinholes shining through, then you need another layer of gesso. If it's opaque, with no pinholes, it's ready to go. Like I said, you'll need a minimum of 2 layers of gesso. That's it. Once it's dry, you can start painting on it. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you run into any problems. Thanks. Goodbye, friends.